You're listening to Raceway Ministries Today. Thanks for joining us for Raceway Ministries Today. In just a few moments, we're going to give you the latest of what's going on in motorsports outreach through the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. Well, we'd like to welcome everybody to another edition of Raceway Ministries Today. My name is Roger Marsh. I'm currently serving as the interim executive director for the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. And if you would like to know more about us, you can go to racewayministries.org, or you can look us up on Facebook at National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. And then we also have a YouTube channel that goes by that same name, and there you'll find some other podcasts that are posted there along with some videos, and it would really help us out, and we would encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's my pleasure and distinct honor today to be able to introduce to you a guy that's been involved in Raceway Ministries for a long time, Todd Christopherson. Todd resides up in DeForest, Wisconsin, and he's the founder and director of Team Jesus Racing Ministries. He's chaplain at several Wisconsin short tracks and different series that run in that area. And if you want to find out a lot about Todd, I think you can check him out at teamjrm.com. And then on Facebook, he's at Todd Christopherson. Todd's been a longtime friend and associate with us at National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. And I've had the joy of being able to keep up with him through his newsletters and with communication through email. And Todd's been a great friend and a great partner in Raceway Ministries' work with us for a long time. Todd, good to have you on the podcast. How are things going up there in your neck of the woods?
Really good. We're about to get another Midwest snowstorm. We're looking forward to a couple of months now when we don't have the snow and we get some racing going on here.
Well, do you guys race snowmobiles up there during the off-racing season?
You know, I have had several people come to me and ask me why we haven't branched out to get to some of the snowmobiling race. Matter of fact, in Wisconsin, host a world championship up at Eagle River. And maybe someday that will happen.
Yeah.
So.
Well, good deal. Well, I know winter is tough on you guys up there. Down here in Texas, we have summer that we have to deal with and all the heat. And I know you probably haven't been around that area for a long time or accustomed to the snow and the ice, and it's just part of the wintertime months. And so I'm sure you take it in stride. You know, you probably don't need to get involved in snowmobiles because you are a very, very busy man from what I can understand. I have a list of touring series and racing series here that I believe you are a part of in terms of serving as chaplain. And from what I understand, it moves from one speedway to another and you are on the go. I have listed here the ARCA Midwest Touring Series, the Big 8 Series, the Central Wisconsin Racing Association, Impact Survival Series, Mid-American Stock Car Series, Midwest Truck Series, and the Tundra Super Late Model Series. Now, I don't know if you can add anything to that list, but that all adds up to being a very, very busy guy in Raceway Ministries.
It absolutely is, and I'm thankful that we've got some people that help us along with a bunch of the events, so we're able to cover just about each one of those series and each one of their events, and we're still looking for a couple more opportunities to have some people come alongside of us, because we've got local tracks that really have reached out to us and would love to see us. I'm over at Jefferson Speedway almost every Saturday, and so that too is added to it. And last year, the Madison International Speedway didn't get to run very many events, but oftentimes I'm there on Friday night.
Wow.
We're a busy group, and God has opened up some tremendous doors. Some of them we never thought would open, and others we're grateful that we've had a long relationship with.
Well, it sounds like you have built some great relationships with people, and as we have beat the drum for that idea for a long time in Raceway Ministries' work, it's all about relationships. And I know you couldn't find your way into the spot where you are in ministry to those series and those raceways without good relationships. So my hat's off to you, and I just thank God for you and the character and personality that He's given to you to be able to walk into those opportunities. I know from talking to others up in your neck of the woods, I'm friends with Travis Kalsdorf up there, who has a radio program on one of the stations. He does sports broadcasting for some local high school football games, and then he also does a racing show every week. You may have met Travis before, I don't know. But he echoed the same thing, that there are numerous venues up there that are in absolute need of chaplains and ministry, and many of them want that, but there's just not enough of you guys to go around. Is that pretty much an accurate assessment of things up there?
That is very true. We have been approached by both asphalt tracks and now several dirt tracks, and we haven't, I say we as in the chaplains up in the Midwest,
right,
haven't been able to reach into that dirt arena as well as we would like, but there are literally dozens, even in Wisconsin, dozens of tracks that would like to have a chaplain.
Wow.
And so we met a couple of weeks ago, and we had a couple of guys that had some interest in the race ministry.
Good.
And we're looking for some more guys that will come alongside of us.
Wow.
Especially those interested in that dirt ministry.
You bet. Well, if it's, and I know Wisconsin is a big racing state, and there are lots of tracks and lots of venues up that way. And, you can duplicate that in many other places. There's just not enough people to go around. But I've heard the cry and the call from up there from several different people. So my prayer is that we'll be able to make some connections and maybe get some people to come over that way. And we'll talk about some of that as we move along here in this discussion. We're talking with Todd Christopherson. Todd is with Team Jesus Racing Ministries up in Wisconsin and is chaplain to several different racing series and travels about to several different speedways in order to minister to those folks out there at those racetracks. Todd, tell me about how your walk with Christ actually got started.
Well, Roger, that's a story that I enjoy telling people because it was all God at work.
Good.
I grew up and, we start our stories at birth, and I don't go day by day or year by year, but just the cliff notes.
Okay.
At my birth, my parents were told I wouldn't walk and I wouldn't talk. But
really?
My dad is somebody that will take up any challenge put in front of him. And so he found some doctors that would work with me, and I ended up being into sports and have some fair academic background. And yet, as much as my dad worked and helped and just gave me that blessing, I still rebelled against him.
Oh.
And I spent teenage years being very, very rebellious. I spent my early 20s being even more so. And then God got a hold of me, and the way that He did it was that I had a younger sister that got saved, and she began to witness to me. And I had an older sister that gets saved, and she began to witness to me. My older sister did something more special than I'll ever even understand and can't express the thanks, and that's that she gave me a Bible, and she said, start reading it and see what it does in your life. Obviously, they were praying very hard for what I was into and the things I had done, the destruction that was around me and in my own life.
Wow.
Well, in October of 1989 alone, I was reading through Matthew 7:7, and I knew God was right there knocking at that door. And I told Him that night, you know how hard I've worked for Satan. I'll give my life that way to you, completely towards you and your effort. If you can use somebody like me, have at it.
Wow. Well, praise God. Wow.
God took me up on that and really changed my heart and my life and where my priorities were going to lie.
Wow. Knowing you like I know you now, I would have never thought that you would have come from that kind of background. But that's just a great trophy of God's grace and God's work to change a person's life. And how awesome. That's absolutely cool. Well, obviously, God has nurtured you in your walk with Him and given you a calling to do something relatively unique, and that is Raceway Ministries work. So how did you get involved in racing, and how did you get involved in Raceway Ministries work?
All right. Well, what happened there was that I had a cousin that raced in a little local track, and I can remember as a teenager going there, and some guys, I guess they were kind of good. There was a guy named Joe Shear, Dick Trickle, Marzetta, Kilquickie. These are guys that made it to the big leagues and were just outstanding racers. And
Sure.
it was just, Wisconsin was a hotbed for racing.
Right.
Like I said, I was involved in some things, and I strayed away from the racing community, didn't see any races for quite a few years. And then my wife, we were married kind of late in life, and her dad happened to work with Dick Trickle. And so she too was a race fan. Well, we decided one night, be good to go to the races. So we went to Madison International Speedway, and I was very surprised that there was no invocation. I was like, I know I've been away from racing a long time, but I'm pretty sure that they still start. It's one of the things great about the sport.
Oh, yeah.
They start with the invocation and the national anthem.
Absolutely.
And people stand and they put their hands over their heart. They bow when it's prayer time. And I thought, wow, this is unusual. I'm going to contact these people and see if they'd like to have somebody pray before the races. Well, they turned me down. They said no.
Oh.
We went the next week, decided we'd go out to the track, and same thing happened. And I was like, I'm going to call these guys one more time, and called them, and they said, no, we kind of had a bad experience. And I was like, okay, well, I'll let this go. And then I heard that they were going to sell the track. So I called one more time, and the person said, I'll give you 15 seconds to pray, and then I want you to sit down. I was like, great, sounds good, I'll do it.
Hey, and we'll take it, right?
That's right. And Roger, I want to remind people that sometimes we want to have this big grand opening, or this, I guess I would say, this ministry that's lots of time and effort and so forth. But that really did. It started out with a 15-second prayer. And what God's opened the doors just from that little 15 seconds of faithfulness is pretty amazing.
It is very, very amazing. A couple of things that I take away from that portion of your story that you've told. One is perseverance and persistent. When you see a need, the doors sometimes don't automatically open up. And, you take what you can get and you start with that. But obviously, it's grown from that, and I think your faithfulness and stewardship in terms of what God opened up and gave to you at that time has paid big dividends. So you just have to be faithful and be persistent, and wow, look what's opened up as a result of that.
That's right.
That's very, very, that's a blessing to hear that, Todd. Well, let's talk a little bit about your involvement in Raceway Ministries work. I really want to turn the clock back, though. I'd like to go back to ministry prior to COVID-19.
Yeah.
How about if you describe for us a weekend in the life of Todd Christopherson before the pandemic? You talked about people having grandiose ideas of ministry being big and, being something that, people just open up their arms and they can't wait to get you there. It doesn't always unfold that way. And sometimes people don't understand the demands of being involved in Raceway Ministries work from week to week. So it might be good if you could describe a weekend in the life of Todd Christopherson back before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. What was it like on a typical weekend for you?
Sure can, Roger. That's something that I enjoy sharing with people, is what a day looks like at the track, whether I'm sharing at a church or at a missions conference or with a group of men. So this is how I describe it, is I show up to the event usually pretty early. And by early, I mean that the drivers are usually in the pits and they've got their setup. But I'll go around and I'll talk to the guys and try to make those individual one-on-one contacts.
Sure.
At the larger events, there's usually a driver's meeting, and I'll always go to the driver's meeting. In most cases, I would say almost all cases, they'll ask me to pray over the drivers for safety, pray over the staff.
Good.
Some of the groups will let me pray with their safety workers, and that's always a blessing.
Oh, yeah.
Those guys need guidance because they can be in situations that, none of us want to be in.
Right.
But they put themselves in that position to be able to handle that. At the local tracks, it's usually practice, watching that, and again, walking the pit,
Right.
getting one-on-one with men and women there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just being with the drivers, but being with the crew chiefs and being with the jackmen and the guys working on tires, and then also the track's staff too, because I want to spend a lot of time with those guys because you see a lot of them too. And in each interaction, you're looking at somebody that needs to have encouragement, somebody that in many cases needs the gospel, that needs to hear a word from Christ, what God says.
Right.
And these guys live real lives too. And so they're going through things that are trouble maybe in relationships. Maybe it's trouble with the job. Maybe it's some other deeper struggles, things that I've gone through even.
Right.
And so I'm able to get one-on-one and share with them. Now, this is a fast-paced sport, so staying in the right place, staying out of the way and yet inside, very important for us. It's usually followed after practice. We go into qualifying, and that's when I'll go car to car and pray with each driver that will allow me to pray with them.
You bet.
We're praying for safety. We're praying for God to keep their head clear, praying for their reaction times. We're praying that they see things that they don't even see, that they'll be able to stay out of harm's way.
You bet.
The thing that I point to when I'm praying with these drivers are two things in Pacific, is that God's given them that talent and God's the one that gives us the protection.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that reaches the hearts as I'm talking with these drivers, praying with them. After qualifying, there's usually a secondary drivers meeting, and I'm usually allowed to pray again there. And then we'll go into the race night, and that's usually some heat races, and we go into the features, and there's ministry going on there. Oftentimes I'll stay in the pit area and be watching the races for anything that could unfold on the track. If something happens, if a driver happens to get into a wreck or hit the wall, I'll go ahead and check with safety. And then I'll go and check with the pit crew, and if there's family members there, we'll attend to them.
Sure.
Make myself available if there needs to be run into the hospital. We'll help in those areas and just making ourselves available.
You bet.
I try to make it all the way to the very end of the events, and I know that there are some guys that put in a lot of effort after events are over. I don't. I usually will walk the pits one time. If there's somebody that needs to have some extra prayer, or there was a situation, I'll check on them, make sure that they know that I'm going to follow up with them the following day, and then I'll usually get done for the evening.
Okay.
And that happens Friday and Saturday and sometimes into Sunday events.
Sure.
There's a track here that runs on Sunday late afternoon, so it fits my church schedule well. And so that's kind of how the weekends unfold for myself.
Wow. Sounds busy, of course, and it is. It's a busy time. There are lots of components that are part of a race weekend, and when you try to plug into the different parts of the event, it's going to turn into a busy night.
Yes, it is.
You mentioned several different relationships that I think are important. You talked about going around to visit with the drivers, you talked about the safety team, talked about the families, talked about the Raceway staff. What do you think are the keys to building good relationships with those people? Because when a crisis comes, typically it's the investment in the relationships that pays off whenever you step into their crisis. But how do you find it to be most effective to begin those relationships and build those relationships with all those different personalities that play all those different roles there at the Raceway? The jackman, the pit crew chief, all those guys.
Roger, that was something we spent a lot of time a couple of Saturdays ago talking about, is how this all starts and what is needed to build those relationships so that they'll open up at some point. And we echoed over and over the importance of being there week to week to week.
Yes.
One of the other chaplains really put it well. He said, these guys are here every single week. They don't take many weeks off.
Right.
He said, not only that, they're in the shop for hours. They'll do their 8-10 hour job, and then they're in those shops for 6 hours a night. And this happens day after day after day during the season.
Sure.
And they're not going to have the respect of any of us if we think we can come in and be there for a night here and be there for a night there, or I'm going to get to the big, so-called big event. We have to be there night in, night out, and we just have to invest into their lives.
Wow, what a great insight. Yeah.
The other thing that we really talked about was how you have to be a great listener. And to be a great listener, you have to have great questions, get those conversations started.
That's right.
And how important it is, that we remember the young boy's name that's getting into the go-kart for the first time and how nervous mom and dad are about that.
Yeah.
Even though they've raced for years. I had one wife that both the husband and the wife race, and she says, I've never been anxious about her husband going out on the track, but the first time my son hit the track, I was a nervous wreck.
Yeah. Well, I had a pastor over in East Texas years ago tell me when I was pastoring in churches, he said, one of the most important things you can do is be there for people in once-in-a-lifetime events. Don't miss those things. And, that mom with that little boy getting in that go-kart, that's a once-in-a-lifetime situation. And for you to be there speaks worlds to her about your care and about God's care for her and her little boy and their family. So, great point. Point well taken. Well, now let me ask you a question, Todd. Do you find that building these relationships at the Speedway result in, you mentioned follow-up earlier, do you find that building these relationships at the Speedway result in some ministry opportunities away from the track?
They absolutely do. When I was getting started back in 2002, shortly after getting started, I think it might have been a year and a half, there happened to be somebody very special to the Wisconsin racing community. And he fell ill, and the family called me, and I spent every night traveling about 45 minutes down to the hospital to be with that family, and did that for several days in a row. It ended up being a week.
Wow.
And that showed the commitment that I had, but the opportunities that I had during that week to witness to so many people coming in. And by witness, I mean, yes, I shared the gospel, but I witnessed, or at least tried to express the witness of God's love, His grace, His mercy, His compassion, and His kindness. And that really opened up doors to some people that I know I would have never got the opportunity with.
Right.
There was some guys in that particular racetrack and series that were pretty hard-nosed guys. They reminded me a lot of myself.
Yes.
And how tough it would have been to approach me.
Right.
And yet God used that to open up a door.
Oh, wow.
And so those crises are really, it's important that we're available for those times of crisis and needs.
Well, and again, that consistency and being there every week at the track with them pays off whenever you get in those kind of situations. Now, Todd, I don't want to belabor the point because I hope we get past it, but I have to ask you, how did the pandemic affect your ministry during 2020? And, even as we head into 2021, what kind of difference did COVID-19 and the pandemic make upon your ministry on racing up there in the Wisconsin area?
Well, Wisconsin obviously had some numbers that increased quite a bit.
Sure.
And our governor's reaction to that was to shut a lot of things down, and that included some of the racing events. Matter of fact, I've mentioned Madison International Speedway several times.
Yes.
The owners there lost all but one event.
Wow.
They did run one special event of fireworks, and I believe that they were able to get one other event in that was a special group that came in.
Okay.
But they lost all but one event that normally I would cover there. And so heart goes out to the McCarns family, and they really had a struggle. They also are the owners of the Midwest Tour, and I do coverage for a lot of their events, and they lost most of their season, including their biggest event that they run is at the Milwaukee Mile. That I say that, and then they also run Oktoberfest, which if your listeners have not ever got to Oktoberfest, it is one of the special events in all of the country. It's 4 days of racing with thousands of laps of
Oh,
racing.
wow.
And
Wow.
just championships I think last year there was 17 championships on the line at Oktoberfest.
You're kidding. What an event.
It is quite the event. We're able to provide ministry for that, but many tracks in Wisconsin that we normally would have been at were not able to get their seasons going early. It was about May that some things began to open up, and so we were able to get over to Jefferson and start some events. They did. I commend that track for how they handle things. They talked a lot about how things would be handled as far as mask and social distancing. And then they really did a very good job in the stands, especially with that, reconfiguring how many people were going to be let in, where they would be seated, and so forth.
Sure.
In the pits, I've got to say that masks were optional there, and people that needed to be careful were very careful.
Good.
And others, we had freedom to be able to do what we normally do.
Good.
God really blessed our situation in allowing us to have that. Prayer is so important, both to the guys and to the ministry, and we were able to have that one-on-one with teams and with families. We're able to reach out to them.
Wow. Good.
So it was a different season. We really missed Madison and not having those opportunities.
I'm sure.
At the beginning of the season, we were fearful that there might not be any events run in Wisconsin. But God saw fit to allow us to get some racing going in May, and we ran from May till October.
Wow, that is awesome. Well, in spite of the pandemic, we just have to always remember that God is in charge. He's got it all under control. And we, in the midst of even something like a pandemic, we take full advantage of the opportunities that God opens up. Now, what do you think the outlook is going to be for 2021 for you guys?
As I look at it right now, obviously Wisconsin again has hit some higher numbers, and the governor just extended one of his policies, and I'm not so sure yet about how things are going to go for Madison, but other tracks in the state sound like they're going to be able to get their tracks open.
Good.
It sounds like each series has a schedule that will be able to get the racing in. I think that the tracks that are going to struggle the most probably are going to be Madison, and hopefully Rockford can continue to keep their race events going.
Sure.
They had a delay in the season, but were able to get some of their events in, and National Short Track Championship was able to be run. And so that's also one of the big events. You mentioned Travis, and we've got a friend over in Minnesota, Adam, and he is over at Elko, and he's concerned about how if they're going to get open or not.
Yes. Right.
The governor shut their season down for the most part last year. He's concerned about it this year. So what I'm hearing guys talk about, and I'm doing it myself, is this off season is so important for us to continue those on track and those race event relationships. We've got to be doing that during this off season.
Yes.
So we've been very intentional about that.
Well, what a great point. And maybe one of the most important things to come up in our conversation today, the fact that even though the racing slows down and even though it may come to a standstill for long periods of time, I've learned in the racing community, it's true in many aspects of life, out of sight, out of mind. And, if you don't make an appearance and maintain the relationship, you can be forgotten pretty quickly. So a great point to stay in touch with the racers, stay in touch with the track owners and all the other people during the off season, especially when things are seemingly grinding to a halt with things like the pandemic. Perfect time to just invest the energy and do what you can to keep those relationships going. Well, we're talking with Todd Christopherson of Team Jesus Racing Ministries. You can get in touch with Todd through his website, teamjrm.com, or you can contact him on his Facebook page at Todd Christopherson. Now, Todd, as you move along in ministry at the racetrack, I know you're like most other folks. It's not something that is cheap. It costs money, and it takes a little bit of resources to make it happen. You know, gasoline for your vehicle to get there, all those trips that you make to the track, not to mention resources and meals that you have to have when you're there. If somebody were interested in making a donation to Team Jesus Racing Ministries, how would they go about that?
Yes, I have those funds directed towards my local home church.
Okay.
And that's the DeForest Evangelical Church.
Good.
Here in DeForest.
Good.
And they can direct that towards them, and they'll get it out to me.
Awesome. All right. Very, very good. Well, I appreciate the fact that you're connected with the local church. A lot of people that are involved in Raceway Ministries work, for some reason or another, they think that that is church for them, and they kind of disconnect from a local church. I'm glad you're involved in one. Equally excited that your local congregation is excited about your call to do what you do and supportive of that. That is awesome. Once again, the name of that church?
DeForest Evangelical Free Church.
All right. DeForest Evangelical Free Church. Our hats off to them for their support for you. And if anybody would like to donate to your ministry, they can do it through that means. Listen, what do you feel like is the most valuable takeaway from being involved with other ministers and other ministry groups? You mentioned a group of chaplains that you have met with just a couple of weeks ago to talk about the upcoming season, and you have been an associate, partner with us in National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries work for some time. What's the most valuable takeaway from connecting with other motorsports ministers and organizations?
Well, when we met last Saturday, it was interesting listening to some of the echoes that we heard from each other. This can be a very difficult ministry. Like I shared with the guys, I haven't had a single guy when I've given an altar call walk down the racetrack to say they accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's a different ministry.
It is, yes.
I did open air ministry for years out in New York and on the East Coast, and you would get people that would just break down in front of you. You know, they'd cry out to Jesus as you shared God's word with them. Mm-hmm. This ministry is so different. These are a bunch of guys that are champions. They know what it takes. They're completely focused on it. And so it can be discouraging sometimes when you spend night after night and, boy, is there any fruit coming from this at all?
Right.
And so having these guys and gals that are involved in Raceway ministry that understand what it's like when you go out there night after night, and when you have a tough night, there can be tough nights.
Oh, yeah.
There can be things going on in different parts of your life that distract you. And having these men and women alongside of you that really understand it can be so encouraging. You bet.
You bet.
One of the guys was sharing how he was so close to just, I don't know, this is what my call is. I'm not seeing what I thought I would see. And by the time we got done with the meeting, he was bouncing. He had a bounce in his step, and he was like, I can't wait for April to get here for my track to open up.
Wow, that's awesome.
So important we're together.
When you come together and encourage one another, well, let me back up. Ministry can be very, very discouraging. And I've discovered a long time ago that Raceway ministry work in many ways is a seed sowing ministry. And you don't always see the fruit, and you don't always see it right away. And it can be very discouraging. But when you have other people around you that are experiencing the same thing, and yet you all know that you're called by God and equipped by God to fulfill this ministry, you can walk away with it with a bounce in your step. And we need that encouragement. I'm so glad that you're a part of our Raceway Ministries family. I'm so glad that you have a group of chaplains up there that you can connect with and enjoy that mutual encouragement. And I hope that those who might be listening today can sense and understand the value of being able to connect with other people involved in motorsports ministry for the sake of connecting. And, beyond connecting, we share resources and we share ideas and that kind of thing. But the encouragement, praying together, all that, probably some of the most important aspects of it. Now, if you were to have an opportunity to look somebody right in the eye right now, and they are contemplating a call to be involved in Raceway Ministries work, they're thinking about it, they feel like maybe God has attracted them to it, they've identified maybe one of those dirt tracks up there in Wisconsin that needs a chaplain, what would you say to them in terms of counsel and advice for stepping out in faith and getting involved in it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Roger. I think that the biggest thing is, where's your heart towards the gospel and people?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a great love to see men and women saved?
Yeah.
Are you in love with God's word?
Oh, yeah.
The other thing that, as I'm talking with people that are thinking about going into the racing ministry, is, God places a call in your heart. Your first call has to be your family. Do you have that right?
Yeah.
And then secondly, you can't abandon your local church. And you brought this up. So important. You can't abandon your local church and the ministry you have there.
That's right.
But can this come alongside and be another piece? Because we don't want to be in, what did the one guy say a couple weeks ago, a holy huddle. He said, too often Christians can get surrounded by other Christians.
That's right.
And the Raceway ministry, it's an open field.
That's right.
People think about going to an international to go find unbelievers, those that are, how does Washer put it, prior to conversion, or Holsby says pre-Christians.
Right.
If we're looking for those that are lost, we can find them at the racetrack. And do you have a passion just to get the gospel to people's hands and hearts?
Yeah.
And then what's your position on prayer? Can you just spend lots of time in prayer? We talked about that a week ago Saturday, how important it is that we're praying right now for each driver by name for this coming season. And if we can remember their crews, their families, we need to be praying over them too.
Oh, man, what a great point. Great point. Wow. Well, Todd, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of our podcast today, what a wealth of wisdom and what a wealth of experience that you have to bring to the table. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you being available to share some of your insights and some of the things that God has taught you about doing ministry out there at the speedways. I'm just so grateful for God's grace in your life, your background, and how God touched you in the midst of that and turned you 180 degrees around and then equipped you to go out and minister to other people and encourage them. What a phenomenal testimony, and I just appreciate you so much. And I just want to say I really appreciate you taking the time to share today, and I'm pretty confident that at some point along the way, as we get into the race season, I'll get back in touch with you and let you tell some more stories about how God's been using you up there in Wisconsin. I think you'd be available to do that?
That sounds great, Roger. I really look forward to it, and I thank you for this opportunity just to give God the glory, because, Roger, this really is all about God and His work.
Amen. Amen. It certainly is. Well, again, we've been talking today to Todd Christopherson. He's the founder and director of Team Jesus Racing Ministries up in DeForest, Wisconsin. Ministers as a chaplain and just in general ministry activity in the midst of the racing world with several different series and several different raceway venues up there in Wisconsin. And we just appreciate you so much, Todd, and look forward to the next time. So any parting words on your part?
Well, Roger, I want to thank you for stepping into your role right now. I know that you have a lot of things going on, that God's called you to a busy life also of ministry. And I'm grateful that you've stepped back into the role with Raceway Ministries, and really looking forward to what's going to happen with this ministry. And the other thing, Roger, that I would say as we depart here, that this is an open mission field. And if you think that you want to get involved, we would so appreciate talking with you about it some more.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Todd. We'll look forward to next time. And meanwhile, to all of our folks that might be listening in today, thank you so much for checking in with us here at Raceway Ministries today. And we'll look forward to the next episode whenever we'll get with some personality that's out there involved in Raceway Ministries work and talk about all the nuts and bolts and talk about the faith that needs to go along with it to do the ministry. Until next time, this is Roger Marsh. If you need to know more information about Raceway Ministries work, go to racewayministries.org, or you can check us out on our Facebook page at National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries, or subscribe and visit our YouTube channel as well. We'll see you next time. Well, thanks so much for tuning in for today's podcast. We'll look forward to having you join us for the next edition of Raceway Ministries Today.